The Impact of Narcissistic Manipulation, Part 3. You ready? Let's go. Hi friends, Tamie M. Joyce here, Empowerment Life Coach, creator of the Freedom class and the Ascension class. And if you're new to my channel, welcome. Please take a second to say hello and introduce yourself in the comments section below. And if you're back, of course, welcome back. Thanks for showing up and for tuning in. Either way, if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to be notified when I post new videos throughout the week. Today's video is part 3 of a 3-part series called The Impact of Narcissistic Manipulation. If you want to watch part 1 and 2, you can do so here and here. Now that said, let's dive a little deeper into narcissistic manipulation and the detrimental impact it has on you. And why am I devoting a full series to this subject? Well, because taking a closer look at the way narcissistic manipulators operate helps us to understand a few critically important things with a whole lot more clarity. Not least of which the fact that the negative feelings you've likely been suffering with the entire relationship, if not your entire life, are not only perfectly understandable, but even quite natural and frankly inevitable reactions to the ongoing stress and frustration caused by the narcissistic manipulation. With that said, let's take a closer look at 4 of the most common emotional reactions people struggle with as a result of having been the target of narcissistic manipulation. Number 1, a chronic sense of loss of power and control. While targets of narcissistic manipulation often feel confused about the motives or methods of the manipulator, they also can't help but be well aware that there is a significant imbalance in the control and power dynamics of the manipulative relationship. Victims of narcissistic manipulation typically have no issue acknowledging that the other person, the manipulator, is not only the one in control of the relationship, but also works hard to perpetuate the illusion that they're superior to their target in every possible way. That's part of the game. Attack and erode your self-esteem, putting you down as a means of propping themselves up, while also lying, smearing, and gossiping about you to others in order to control how others perceive you by manipulating what they think and how they feel about you. They'll also be sure to paint the picture of just how benevolent they've been towards you for anyone who might be watching. You know, because they're just such good people. Nonsense. And don't kid yourself. Karma will catch up to these people if it hasn't already. You can't go through life lying, targeting, smearing, diminishing, demeaning, and manipulating, even if only directing your toxicity toward one single target, such as the family scapegoat, and expect that won't boomerang back to you one way or another. I promise you, before all is said and done, these people get their due. So be patient. As A Course in Miracles says, those who are certain of the outcome can afford to wait, and wait without anxiety. In the meantime, however, it's important to understand that targets of narcissistic manipulation also have to live with the fact that the narcissistic manipulator's wants, wishes, and needs are always going to be primary in the relationship, while the scapegoated target's own needs remain largely unexpressed, unacknowledged, and therefore go predominantly unmet. The target's sense of anxiety and frustration regarding the total imbalance of power and control in the relationship is indicative of the climate of manipulation they're forced to contend with. And it's important to note that many of the fears, wounds, and insecurities that make targets vulnerable to manipulation to begin with also help to establish and reinforce both the perception of the manipulator's superiority as well as the reality of the manipulator's dominant and coercive control. For example, people pleasers and approval seekers are predisposed to put the needs of others before their own. They've literally been programmed to do so since early childhood. And the largely subconscious, unhealed, wounded inner child is a major driving factor in perpetuating the dysfunctional dynamics that are so toxic to their own well-being. If only I can be good enough, do enough, be enough, try harder, do better, get it right, be perfect. Maybe then I'll get the love, validation, acceptance, approval, safety, and security I've been starved for my whole life. And this, my friends, is a big part of the how and why we become willing participants in these sick, dysfunctional, and manipulative relationship dynamics. We've got to take responsibility for our own stuff if we ever want anything to change. Now that said, in addition to living with chronic feelings of confusion and frustration, targets of narcissistic manipulation also report feeling misunderstood and are, therefore, often misrepresented. And this, of course, on top of being criticized, diminished, demeaned, taken for granted, and exploited on some, if not many, levels. And more often than not, they struggle with control issues of their own that include both feeling controlled by others as well as feeling out of control in their own lives. And as a result, targets of chronic narcissistic manipulation end up feeling depressed, demoralized, stressed, worried, and anxious. And all too often struggle with some form of addiction, whether that be food, shopping, gambling, alcohol abuse, and or using and abusing other mind-altering substances, or some other form of addictive, compulsive, self-medicating behavior. And this, of course, is about nothing more than reaching for whatever they can in an attempt to make the pain of the reality they've been living for so long stop. Number 2. Loss of personal identity and diminished self-esteem. Here's the thing. Narcissistically manipulative relationships serve the ego demands of the narcissistic manipulator while chipping away at the self-esteem and self-worth and personal identity of the target. The longer the manipulative dynamic goes on, the more the unraveling of the target's sense of self and capacity for healthy self-reliance are handicapped, if not fully crippled. The more the target surrenders to the manipulative and coercive control of the narcissistic manipulator, the less he or she will be able to perceive themselves as independent, autonomous, functional, productive, sovereign, and fully self-relying as an adult. And as a consequence, the target's self-confidence and self-respect are ultimately annihilated if the manipulative dynamic is allowed to continue. And despite the fact that the target's needs remain in the basement of the relationship, he or she will at the same time become increasingly dependent on the narcissistic manipulator's validation and approval, as well as on the relationship and what it represents. For example, clinging to the illusion of a family connection and a sense of belonging that has never actually been their experience in reality, more than surface level stuff anyway, as the narcissistic manipulator keeps the appearance of being the good person. Or, in another scenario, the target's personal identity and entire sense of self are wrapped up in their ability to perform in the job where narcissistic manipulation is not only enabled but actually runs rampant. I know that probably doesn't make a lot of sense for those of you who have not lived it or had the experience, but remember, narcissistic abuse is all about being sucked into an inverted reality. In an inverted reality, everything is upside down, inside out, and not as it appears. And a highly codependent, wounded, and disempowered empath is going to be acting from that upside down, inverted reality they've likely been in since early childhood. So don't expect to be able to only apply surface level logic when trying to make sense of these issues. Unless you've lived it, you have no ever-loving idea. If, however, you have lived it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if that's you, comment below and tell me whether or not this is resonating as true for you. And if so, what are you doing to permanently extricate yourself from the manipulative dynamic so you can take better care of yourself? Let me know in the comments section below. And if you'd like to learn more about the possibility of working with me in my 8-week transformational coaching program, the Freedom Class, there is a link in the description below where you can apply to see if you qualify for a free one-on-one consultation with either myself or a member of my team. Number 3, speaking the truth and expressing legitimate anger. The research is clear. People who are manipulated, controlled, and or otherwise exploited, especially by coercive abusers projecting their own disowned shadow onto vulnerable and powerless targets, like, for example, children, these targets of narcissistic manipulation eventually grow up, rise up, and more importantly, speak up about the abuse they've endured. It's just a matter of time. Now, however, long before their anger and the truth of their experience is expressed openly, the target of narcissistic manipulation has to grapple with a whole host of toxic negative emotions, and among other things, the debilitating self-esteem issues brought on by the coercive and manipulative control dynamics they've found themselves in. So as much as the target's suppressed fear, shame, and quite legitimate anger and frustration may well be contained for years, sometimes even decades, understand that's very much being done as a means of self-preservation and survival. What onlookers don't typically see or understand is that the target is choosing, and maybe not entirely consciously for sure, but choosing nonetheless, to suppress the anger and other painful feelings that the manipulation is creating, rather than run the risk of violating the silent, unspoken contract they were manipulated into years, or, like I've said, sometimes even decades earlier. Why? Because risking a confrontation with their abusers will undoubtedly end with the target being further abused, and more likely than not, cast out, fully smeared, further scapegoated, and completely abandoned. And when it comes to the negative reaction from the narcissistic manipulator, that's just the beginning. They're just getting started. And targets of chronic, long-term narcissistic manipulation know this. They know this is what they'll face, as, like I said, many have already endured years, if not a lifetime, of being the family scapegoat. So depending on the situation, there's a lot at risk, and it's crystal clear the way out isn't likely going to be easy or pain-free. But what's the alternative? Sooner or later, you've got to choose you. Choose to love yourself. Love yourself first and love yourself more. And do what you know you need to do and speak up and stand in your truth, come what may. And on that note, last but not least, number 4. Targets of narcissistic manipulation feel ensnared, scapegoated, and victimized. It goes without saying that narcissistically manipulative relationships create untold levels of fear, stress, pain, anxiety, and confusion in targets for many reasons. And the net effect of living with these damaging levels of stress is that it feeds a vicious, deeply unconscious, and self-perpetuating cycle. Because narcissistic manipulation is fundamentally coercive, often unpredictable, and highly frustrating, being chronically manipulated in this fashion inevitably leads to high levels of anxiety as well as depression. What's more is, this chronic stress has predictable, distorting effects on the target's perception, rational thought, and their judgment. In other words, their ability to discern who's who and what's what. Most specifically, the stress brought on by narcissistic manipulation ultimately closes off the target's ability to see alternatives, to perceive clear and productive ways of breaking free, or to try healthy and effective ways of challenging the status quo. Typically, the target will only see 2 courses of action. It sounds like this. Either I do or try to be what he or she wants, or I face painful, intolerable, and potentially devastating consequences. And as I've alluded to before, they're not wrong. And I know this from my own personal experience. But again, what's the alternative? Continue to live a lie? Continue to allow yourself to be manipulated into silence, carrying mountains of toxic guilt, shame, and fear that actually belongs to others, not you? Choosing to sacrifice the peace and personal freedom that comes from standing in the light of truth, come what may? I know which road I chose, and I can tell you, painful as the fallout was, long as the grieving process was, my only regret was not having done so 20 years sooner. True story. Victimization is a harmful pattern of thinking and behaving characteristic of people whose victim status has been fully incorporated into their self-concepts, their deeply ingrained subconscious self-image. And it's fully indicative of the damaging effects of being targeted by toxic and abusive others long-term, and as a result, seeing yourself as a powerless victim. And the truth is, you may have been targeted, and if so, you've likely been victimized. But that doesn't mean that you have to continue to identify with being a victim. This does not have to be your personal identity. There are alternatives. And without question, the alternatives require a certain amount of courage and strength. For example, seeking out and finding healthy, specialized guidance and loving, compassionate support for yourself. This can go a long way to help you shift out of the funk of a victimized mentality and into that of a fully empowered spiritual warrior. Whether you realize it or not, the truth is alternatives are available to you if you're able and willing to choose better for yourself. Starting today, you can make that choice, one small step at a time, if necessary, but you can do it. Remember, you're fighting for nothing less than your personal freedom, your emotional and physical health, as well as your personal dignity, integrity, sense of self-esteem, and self-respect. In truth, you're fighting for your life. This is your life we're talking about, and you can take your power back. It's time, your time. Do what you know you must, and do whatever you need to do to love and support yourself fully all the way. You've got this. And with that, I'm going to call it a wrap. How can Tamie M Coaching help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to my channel and click that notification bell to make sure you get my new video every Friday. Number 2, watch my free web class by clicking on the link in the description below. You'll learn about my personal journey and professional experience through decades of research specific to healing and recovery from codependency and narcissistic abuse. You'll also learn about some powerful strategies that you can begin to use today. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and you'd like to be supported by a stellar community of like-minded people who are focused on solutions that actually work, you can learn about my 8-week transformational coaching program, The Freedom Class, by going to TamieMCoaching.com and clicking on programs and reviews for all the details. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to break free from painful relationship patterns permanently and actually make lasting progress in your healing and recovery, go to TamieMCoaching.com and click on Apply Now to learn how you can become my client.